Subtropical Gardening Podcast with Paul Plant.
Today on the Subtropical Gardening Podcast, which is also streamed on the Ultimate Gardening Tips YouTube channel, we're tackling Biodiversity Blueprint for 2026 for home gardeners. In this presentation, in this YouTube channel, I'll be addressing the issue of our traditional gardening styles. Basically, everything you've ever learned, we throw out the window. So old garden design principles need to go on the scrap heap, pretty much like the abacus has done for mathematics. We have surpassed the stage of abacus and we need to get over the old traditional garden design and principles that everyone is used to. Now by 2026, which is coming up very soon, your backyard could be a living, breathable testament to nature's resilience, teeming with local wildlife, everything from the insects to critters you never imagined possible. In this podcast, we're going to talk about and investigate strategies to do with the plant choices. It's basically your mindset is what we're planning to fix and change and develop to turn your patch of land into a biodiversity hotspot, attracting and sustaining and thriving a natural community of wildlife and plants. Hi, my name is Paul Plant. I'm a qualified horticulturist with over 40 years of industry experience in the nursery, landscape, and of course, I'm an avid plant collector and a grower. As I mentioned, this streamed video will be both on Subtropical Gardening Podcast and also on the Ultimate Gardening Tips YouTube channel. So let's get started. The first off is I just want to talk about this new term that tends to be a little bit popular overseas. It's called rewilding. And what it means is getting the wildness back into our gardens. So imagine if your yard was just sterile lawn. Not much buzzing, not much wildlife in your yard. Probably a lot of chemicals and processes just to keep that lawn pristine, award-winning even. However, it doesn't really attract wildlife at all. What we want to do is to rewild your garden. And we're talking beyond just a few wild flowers. We're talking about creating a whole ecosystem, thriving with a little bit of very careful environmental design, but basically contributing to habitat corridors so that you're part of a network, and of course, carbon sequestering, a very important component of planning forward. Now, this isn't about aesthetics, and it's not about winning the prettiest garden award, which people are used to winning in the past. And I know here in Australia, we have a lot of pretty garden awards, and I'm sure the UK and the US have those same situations. This is about making a real difference for local biodiversity by creating a connected network of green corridors so that wildlife can go from one property through yours and onto the next. You are part of a much bigger picture here. And by doing that, you're also improving the sequestering of carbon processes because of the vegetation and the processes you're using in the garden. Now, to help this objective, we basically need a complete mindset shift on how we look at gardens both now and in the future. The concept of aesthetics needs to change. How gardens are judged for competitions and also what is shown on TV needs to be modified, needs to change for the future. Also, how we value our gardens in terms of the property value, money, and also its value to the broader community, other people, and of course, to the environment. The next stage is why really does biodiversity matter? What is it? Why should we care? Why should we worry about it? Well, biodiversity means a biological mixture. It's a mixture of insects and animals and plant species. We're not after a monoculture, which is just one planting. So imagine an orchard of, say, apples. They predominantly only have apples and nothing else on that property. If one disease, one pest infiltrates that entire property, all the apple crop could be destroyed. And we know over in the UK, there's been an oak disease that's wiped out most of the oaks. And there are other diseases around the world which has also threatened populations of crops and also native species, both of plants and of animals. So this biodiversity is critical for the survival of species and also to create a really nice garden. There's also the issue of climate change. We need to address biodiverse species that can adapt to climate change. Also, when we do biodiversity, the thing that we really can grapple on is, as gardeners, we can grow particular species to help conserve, preserve species, and that is through cultivation. We can maintain species for the future if we grow particular plants for the future, and also that will help animal species for the future. Like, for example, just got to move my little camera little buttons around a little bit. So for example, in my property, I grow a lot of the Richmond birdwing butterfly vine for the butterflies. So I've planted it because the butterfly is regarded as endangered and threatened. And because of urban development, a lot of the really good habitat has been destroyed. So part of my biodiversity forward planning process on my property is to plant the vine necessary for the caterpillars to survive so that we have the butterfly in the future. And the same can be said about a lot of other plant species which animals rely upon. So in Australia, obviously, we have gum trees, which are critical for koalas. We have a lot of other plant species also, which are critical for the survival of other plants. So whether it's an insect, a frog, a koala, overseas, it could be other native animals to your particular country, which is an animal that needs to survive into the future. So find out what plant species are needed to keep that plant alive, and also do a little bit of research. For example, I can get books and little handbooks that relate to particular butterflies and lizards and birds that relate to my particular climate through, in my case, the Museum of Queensland. There is a wealth of information available for all home gardeners if you contact your local government authority or museum or wildlife groups. That way you can find out what is native to your area and grow the plants to attract them, so you are part of the corridor. You will be producing part of the solution for 2026 and onwards. Now, climate change obviously is disrupting all of our traditional gardening practices and also the ecosystems. So we need to create our gardens like a microclimate so that we can link one area to another area. We have the capacity as gardeners to provide so many solutions. And of course, by us creating these microclimates, we're assisting with the carbon sequestering process, which is really, really important. The plant choices, again, can be something that we need to seriously consider. What will grow in the soil? What will grow in our local climate? What plants are suitable? Sunlight, shade, cold, heat, storms, in some cases, frost, snow. So those kind of plant decisions are very important to determine the right species for your particular site. Now, each plant can, when it's growing, provide habitat and food for the animals. But also, when the leaves fall to the ground, when the branches fall, when limbs fall out of the sky from trees, that's part of the sequestering the carbon process, which is really important. And most people think most of the carbon is in the foliage and the branches. However, most of it, the carbon, is actually as a result of those materials falling to the ground, and it's in the soil. So as we improve the soil, we increase the capacity of that carbon sequestering process. By us gardening and composting, adding organic manure, remulching what comes out of the taller trees is a really good step for us to work on our carbon sequestering processes. And because it's such a very large topic, I don't want to go into it too much detail with this video. So I'll get in an interview process, someone with a little bit more details and more expertise on that topic, and I'll tackle that topic at a later video. So in terms of a blueprint for backyarders, for home gardeners to create this oasis, this biodiversity oasis, which is what every gardener wants to do. Well, what can you do? Well, the first step, I love my non-natives, but in terms of biodiversity, probably the easiest step forward is to start with a list of priority native species in your area. So what is a priority native species? Well, it's, as I mentioned, doing that research to identify what species are local to the area, endemic, find out what animal species are local to your area and what plant species they need to survive. For example, the host plant species for butterfly caterpillars, also nectar plants for things like birds and sugar gliders here in Australia. Overseas, you might have other particular plants important for squirrels or whatever other native creatures you have in your country. Now, this will form part of the backbone of the plant palette from which you can grow it up and expand on more specialized plants. But start with that as your base palette. That can be your hedging, your screening plants. It's basically your forest component. It's the foundation for your property. And then you can add more specialized plants if you want more interesting species like some of the bee populations or the other pollinators to come into your yard. But you need to do the research and contact one of your local wildlife groups. Now, if you have done that, I'd love to hear from you. If you have, add your comment in the comment section. I'd love to hear the feedback that you've had while you've contacted those particular groups. Another important thing for the blueprint for your property, and I just touched it just then, is trees. Old trees and fallen limbs are very important for the carbon sequestering process, but also they have a function. So the birds might sit in them to hunt for their prey. You've got also hollows of trees, which is good for nesting. You've got the branches, which is also very important for nesting. You've got other creatures which live in the trees. So they have a function, a very, very important role in your garden to create biodiversity. We also want to create layers. So we've got a mulch layer, which is mostly where your lizards, your snails, your slugs, native creatures, and all of the microbes will live and thrive. And in Australia, we have the echidnas and the potoroos and all the other animals that live at the ground level. Then in the next layer, you have the understory of the vegetation. And this is where we get, for example, here, whip birds coming in and other small birds that live between the ground level and the next level up. So this understory is part of a layered habitat, which is very, very important. Then, of course, you've got the top layer, as I mentioned, predatory birds, nesting for birds, sugar gliders and other critters will be at the very top of your trees and things like that. These are all very important to create the biodiversity. You've got butterflies that will fly to the top of the tree and they will also come down to ground level. So this layered effect is very important and critical for creating a corridor from one area to another area. You're just part of the block and hopefully you're that important link that can link that part to the next property down the road. And of course, we can't forget water. Water is critical for us. We need it. And of course, animals need it. Insects need water as well. So if you are going through a dry period, think about if you have the capacity to put in a dam, fantastic. Or put in some water features during those dry periods to help the animals survive during that dry period. Because if they die out, then basically that's a little bit of the biodiversity that has disappeared. We want to sustain the population until the rains come and then they will be fine. Key point here, please do not make it a habit We want the animals to just rely upon you if it's absolutely essential for their survival. We need wildlife to rely upon their wild nature. In other words, they source water, they source the food, they source the pollen, they survive outdoors in the environment. We do not want wildlife to become reliant on human interaction. That's very, very important. Now, getting closer towards the end, I'm trying to sum her up quite well. Now, there are three main steps for biodiversity aiming forward for 2026. This is the steps to achieve the objective. This is your action plan. Number one, source plants locally and ethically. Now, what that means is support your local garden centres, especially those that specialize in native plants, because they will ideally have the plants best suited to your soil and to your local microclimate. They'll have the best success rate. And also, they might even give you some extra tips on which species will bring the best wildlife or insect life into your yard, especially, for example, as I mentioned, the Richmond birdwing butterfly, making sure you grow that particular plant if you are in the catchment area of the butterfly species. Also, look for a nursery that's trying to produce its crops chemically free so that it ticks one of the environmental awareness issues. We want the nursery industry to be environmentally sensitive as possible, and yes, most are definitely, but there are some chemicals still available to the nursery industry here in Australia that are still being used. And I do know overseas you have the same problems. So look for and ask your local nursery what kind of pesticides they've used, what type of fungicides they've used, and I'll let you make a decision if you wish to proceed further with the purchases. Please remember, though, that with a pesticide, they have a withholding period, and after that withholding period, it's generally safe for us and usually for the insects as well. There are, however, some insecticides that will last a little bit longer and affect bees and some other insects. So that's why it's fairly important to really question your retail plant nurseries and ask them about the pesticides that they use. Another thing is just remember that when you buy soil, plants, mulch materials, they eventually will be part of your carbon sequestering process. So again, think about the chemical usage in those products. And you might as well, one of the key things with sourcing locally is that you will be reducing the carbon footprint of your transportation to source the plants. And I just mentioned point two, which is ditch the chemicals. This is especially at home. If you can reduce any usage of the pesticides, if you have to use a pesticide, try to consider some of the more kind of natural alternatives if you can. One of the favorite ones I love is just going out squeezing or grabbing the insects and squashing them. That by far is the most organic you can find, but I do understand sometimes certain products may be needed, but the objective is, hence water importance, the objective is to reduce, if not completely eliminate, any pesticides that you are using. And one of the key things for that is some pesticides, the residual effect will build up in the food web. So if you apply a pesticide to one tiny insect, a bird might eat 10 of those insects. A predator bird might eat 5 of those birds. So the insecticide can potentially build up to extreme levels in a larger critter. And we kind of notice this with the heavy metals in fish. So the bigger the fish, the longer it's lived, the more it's eaten, and it digests some of these heavy metals over time. So the bigger the fish, the more heavy metals it will have. It's pretty much the same story with predatory birds. They eat more food over a longer period. There's a higher potential for chemicals to be built up in their system, which is why point two was ditch the chemicals. Point 3 is embrace imperfection, which means stop pruning your plants all the time. Stop trying to create the perfect manicured lawn. The reality is the perfect manicured lawn uses way too much pesticide, way too much herbicide, doesn't attract bird life because you've killed the grubs in there, so there's no parasitic insects coming in, there's no parasitic birds coming in to hunt the grubs. Lawn is, if grown naturally without pesticides, is fantastic, but a high quality lawn, which is kind of like a bowling green, is definitely an environmental disaster. Probably why I don't play golf and don't agree with golf and a few other things, but that's a different story. Let leaf fall where it does. So when it comes out of the sky and it falls from the tree down to the lower areas, sweep it up and put it in your garden bed. Just push to one side or use a blower and blow it into your garden bed. It will break down. It will return the carbon back to the soil, which is exactly where you want it. It's all about recycling and reusing the material that is already on your property. In fact, I talked about this in one of my previous emails all about mulch and organic matter, so check that one out as well. What else should I really mention? Okay, when the leaves fall out of the sky, just remember a tree might have had its roots 5 meters down and probably 10 meters wide. Over that period, over that area, it's extracted a lot of the nutrients from the soil and it's pushed it up the trunk and into the leaves. Now the leaves have fallen back down to the ground. That nutrient has recycled back to the soil. So definitely it's an asset for you. It's a mineral for you to keep on site. You don't want to mine it away. You want to keep it on your property. The other thing that this does is that it boosts your microflora, your beneficial fungi and bacteria in your soil. So rather than buying in microbes in a little container and spending huge amounts of money, you can save yourself a lot of money just by collecting the leaf debris and mulching it on site. Saving money definitely works with biodiversity, and environmentally, it's a good move. And this whole process, of course, it helps boost natural carbon sequestration. And this is why we often talk in the horticultural industry about a chop and drop technique. That's when you're walking around the garden and a branch might be in the way, you just chop it off, just drop it on the ground, and it will slowly decompose. Chop and drop is a method to embrace as part of this embracing imperfection in your garden in order to create those 3 steps of biodiversity. Now it's time to wrap this all up. So in order to create a sustainable, rewilded garden, a paradise, your garden, your blueprint for biodiversity, the thing is observe and adapt. We want to learn from nature. We need to learn and be observant of the weather conditions and how plants react. We find out what struggles and what thrives, and those are the things that give us guidance in determining what to buy more of. So if a plant we have bought under the advice of a garden center has died, and you're unable to identify what the problem was, and the garden nursery hasn't been able to fully understand or give you a reason for the death which you can't rectify, then choose a completely different species still suitable for your site, and you'll most likely have a much better success rate. Another key thing is to join a movement. Now here in Australia, I recommend joining a group called Landcare. Overseas, it could be called something else. These are groups that focus on native local species. It's part of this rewilding movement that's happening around the world. And their aim is obviously to create wildlife habitats, predominantly using plants, make these habitat corridors, fixing the waterways, replanting, getting rid of weeds. All of this is just part of their objective, and it's a great movement to be part of. And while they do that, They are also improving and enhancing the carbon sequestering on a much larger scale. So if you do it just on your property, you are part of this huge movement. Now, if you have joined one of these groups, again, please put a comment in the comment section. I'd love to hear from you which ones you have actually joined. Also, finally, please remember your property is a living entity. It's kind of like a legacy that you're going to pass on to the next generation. And if you look after your property now, the next generation will get a better garden, one that will survive a lot longer, will flower, and basically be much more successful. What you need to do is to have this mindset of thinking about the future, thinking about the biodiversity that you have already in your yard and how to create it. You might read books on garden design, but as I mentioned, that is old school. It doesn't really relate for you if you want to create a biodiversity blueprint for you for 2026. You could perhaps take some of the key points of balance and harmony and contrast, but go back to the basics of your plant selection, go back to the fundamental backbone of your plant species and use those to create the garden of your dreams. What you create, it will be a tangible impact on you and on everyone else in your street, in your neighborhood. It's part of this corridor, this habitat. It's not just a movement, it is a significant international direction that people are going towards. And what you're doing is, although you might see it as just in your garden, it's much more than that. You are part of a corridor, you are part of this international movement. It's not that it's brand new, it's been around for a while, it's just been quiet, humming in the background. You know it's there, it's ticking on your brain. It knocks on your head occasionally and saying, hey, plant something else. It's better for the environment. Well, folks, this is when you need to do it. I've given you the 3 steps that I think you need to do for biodiversity for 2026. It's your blueprint. It's some action points for you to undertake. I know in my yard, there's a lot of things that I do, which are definitely for the future. I'm part of the land care group, which is Land for Wildlife. A large part of my property I do not touch. It is for wildlife, a corridor. And I encourage everyone else to consider whatever steps they can to achieve the same things. And folks, that's the wrap up for today. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. And next week, I'll come up with another topic. I'm just trying to sort out a few guest speakers, and we'll find out next week what the topic will be. And until then, just remember that if you would like to follow daily garden tips, please go to Paul Plant Horticulture channel. Every single day I put up a garden YouTube video on a tip or a plant feature that I grow and that I encourage people to grow for whatever reason, environmental, or it's just a pure beautiful plant and worth considering. And obviously subscribe to this channel, which, as I said, is featured both in the Subtropical Gardening podcast and also the Ultimate Gardening Tips YouTube channel. Folks, thank you very much, and until next video, cheers for now.